The night was unnervingly quiet. Officer Daniel Reeves had spent the past few hours patrolling the dimly lit streets of Crestwood, a small town nestled between endless stretches of forest. It was the kind of town where nothing ever seemed to happen, until it did. Reeves had been a cop for over a decade, long enough to know that silence was often more unsettling than chaos. His radio crackled to life, shattering the eerie calm. Unit 7, we have a possible 1033. The neighbor reports a young girl at the second-floor window of 184 Oak Hollow Drive, waving and screaming for help. Reeves straightened in his seat. A child in distress. That was enough to send a bolt of urgency through his veins. He flicked on his siren and sped toward the address, the distant echoes of his patrol car bouncing off the sleepy houses. As he pulled up in front of 184 Oak Hollow, an unsettling sensation crawled up his spine. The house was old, too old, in fact. The wooden structure looked neglected, its paint peeling in long, brittle strips. It was the kind of house that seemed frozen in time, untouched by the modern world. But what struck Reeves the most was the absolute stillness. No lights, no movement, no sounds. Yet, as his eyes traveled upward, they landed on the second-floor window. And there she was, a little girl, no older than 8, her pale face illuminated by the dim glow of the street lamp. Her eyes were wide, glistening with tears, and her small hands pounded weakly against the glass. Her lips moved, though no sound reached him. Reeves grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, I have a visual on the child. No sign of forced entry or movement inside. Requesting backup." A brief silence then. "Negative, Unit 7. Nearest unit is 20 minutes out. Proceed with caution. 20 minutes. Too long." Reeves knew he couldn't wait. He stepped out of the car, his boots crunching against the gravel. The house loomed over him like a forgotten relic of something terrible, but he forced himself forward. The porch creaked under his weight as he knocked firmly on the door. "Hello? This is Officer Reeves with the Crestwood PD. Is anyone home?" No response. Another knock, harder this time. Still nothing. He tested the doorknob, unlocked. That was never a good sign. Reeves pushed the door open cautiously, his hand hovering over the grip of his holstered weapon. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of dust and something else. Something rancid. Stepping inside, he flicked on his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the foyer. Old furniture, draped in yellowed sheets, stood like forgotten statues. The wallpaper curled at the edges, revealing darkened wood underneath. The house was abandoned, or so it seemed. A soft thump echoed from upstairs. Reeves stiffened. "Hello?" he called out again. No answer. But then, a whisper. Faint, almost inaudible. "Help me!" Reeves' pulse quickened. He followed the voice, his boots muffled by the dust-laden carpet as he ascended the creaking staircase. The second floor was even darker, the air colder. He moved cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the blackness. Finally, he reached the door to the room where the girl had been. It was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The room was empty. No girl, no furniture, just peeling wallpaper and a cracked window. A chill swept over him. Had he imagined her? Then, a giggle, high-pitched, playful. He spun around, flashlight trembling. The sound had come from further down the hall. With slow, measured steps, he moved toward the source, the old wooden floor groaning beneath him. He reached the last door at the end of the hall. Another whisper. "Help me, please." The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Reeves pushed open the door. Inside, the room was nearly empty, save for an old wooden rocking chair in the center. And there, sitting in the chair, was the girl. She was exactly as he had seen her from outside. Same pale face, same wide, frightened eyes. But now, up close, something was off. Her dress was outdated, the fabric tattered and thin. Her skin looked almost too pale, as though she hadn't seen sunlight in years, and her eyes, too dark. too hollow. Reeves swallowed hard. "Hey there, sweetheart. I'm Officer Reeves. I'm here to help you. Can you tell me your name?" She didn't respond. He took a cautious step closer. "Are you alone in this house?" She blinked slowly, then a whisper, barely audible. "He's coming." A cold sweat broke out across Reeves's brow. "Who's coming?" The girl turned her head slightly. Behind him. A rush of ice flooded his veins as he spun around, gun drawn. Nothing. Just an empty room. When he turned back, the girl was gone. The rocking chair was still moving, swaying back and forth in slow, deliberate motions. Reeves's breath came fast, his heart pounding against his ribs. He swept the flashlight around wildly. "Hello? Where did you go?" Silence. Then, something new. A sound. Soft at first, like distant static, then growing louder, a deep guttural breathing, coming from the hallway. Reeves tightened his grip on his gun. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to run. But he couldn't, not without finding the girl. With a steadying breath, he stepped toward the door. The hallway stretched before him, longer than before, darker than it had any right to be. And at the far end, a shadow, tall, unmoving, watching. Then, it moved. Not walking, not running, but shifting, glitching, like a broken film reel, snapping closer with each flicker of movement. Reeves' breath hitched. Then the light in his flashlight flickered. Then it went out. And in the pitch-black silence, something whispered, "You shouldn't have come." Darkness swallowed Officer Reeves whole. For a moment, the silence was so complete that he could hear his own heartbeat, thundering in his ears. His flashlight was dead, his only source of light extinguished, as if the house itself had willed it so. The air was thick, heavy with an almost suffocating weight. And then, that voice again. "You shouldn't have come." The whisper curled around him like cold fingers. Reeves's pulse spiked as he fumbled with his flashlight, shaking it violently. Click. A dim flicker. Click. A weak beam of light sputtered to life. And in that brief moment of illumination, he saw it. Something was standing at the end of the hall. No, not standing. Looming. A tall, shadowed figure, its form warped and unnatural, as if reality itself was struggling to contain it. The thing was shifting in place, flickering like an image trapped between two frames of existence. Its head was tilted at an impossible angle, its limbs too long, its fingers twitching. Reeves froze. The figure took a step forward, and then another. Each movement was wrong, unnatural, like a marionette being controlled by an unseen force. Reeves's training kicked in. He raised his gun, his voice sharp and commanding. "Stay where you are!" No response. Another step closer. Reeves's grip tightened. "I said stay back!" The figure twitched again, its body contorting. Then it stopped, and the silence returned. Reeves's breath came fast and shallow. His finger hovered over the trigger, but deep down he knew he couldn't shoot at something that wasn't supposed to exist. Then, a voice. Small. Fragile. "Help me." The girl. Reeves's head snapped toward the sound. It came from one of the rooms down the hall, just past the shadowed figure. When he turned back, the figure was gone. A chill ran through him. He forced his legs to move, his body feeling sluggish, as if the very air around him resisted his movements. He pushed through the hallway, past the space where the figure had been standing moments ago. The door at the end of the hall was slightly open. Beyond it, complete darkness. Reeves hesitated. He knew, deep down, that whatever was happening in this house was beyond his understanding. But he was a cop. A child was in danger. And he wasn't about to leave her behind. Taking a steadying breath, he nudged the door open with his gun. The room was empty. Bare wooden floors, cracked walls, no furniture, no girl, and yet, something was wrong. The air felt different, charged with an unnatural energy. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, shifting ever so slightly. Then he saw it. In the center of the floor, scratches. Long, deep grooves carved into the wood, forming a chaotic spiral. At the heart of the spiral, something metallic. A key. Reeves knelt down, hesitant. He reached for the key, his fingers brushing against the ice-cold metal. The second he touched it, a deafening bang. The door slammed shut behind him. Reeves spun, his heart hammering against his ribs. He lunged for the door handle, twisting it hard. Locked. The temperature in the room plummeted. His breath came out in visible puffs. Then, the whispering started. Not just one voice, many. They layered over each other, hushed and frantic, speaking in a language he couldn't understand. The walls seemed to pulse, the shadows stretching like grasping hands. Reeves pressed his back against the door, gun raised, scanning the darkness. And then, a creaking sound, slow, deliberate, the rocking chair. It was in the corner of the room now, though Reeves could have sworn the room had been empty before. And it was moving, rocking, back and forth, and sitting in it. The girl, her wide, unblinking eyes locked onto his. "Where did you go?" Reeves asked, his voice unsteady. "I was looking for you." She didn't answer. Instead, she lifted one frail arm and pointed. Behind him. A sickening realization crawled through Reeves like ice water. There was something in the room with him. He turned slowly, and his breath caught in his throat. The figure was there, closer this time. Its face, or what should have been a face, was an inky void, shifting and writhing as if filled with endless darkness. It stood just feet away, silent, unmoving. Reeves swallowed hard, his grip tightening on his gun. "What do you want?" the girl whispered behind him. "It doesn't want you to leave." The figure took a step forward, and then Reeves fired. The gunshot roared through the house. For a split second, the muzzle flash illuminated the room, and in that flash, the figure was gone. The girl, the rocking chair, gone. Reeves's breath came in ragged gasps. The air was still thick with an oppressive weight, but the room was empty once again. Then, a soft click. The door unlocked. Reeves hesitated only a moment before yanking it open and stepping back into the hallway. But something had changed. The house was different. The walls, once cracked and peeling, now looked untouched. The dust, the decay, all gone. The air was warmer, the silence no longer suffocating. Had he imagined it all? He turned back toward the room. It was no longer empty. It was fully furnished, a child's bedroom, neat and pristine. A small bed, a dresser, and a collection of old dolls lined up in perfect rows. And on the far wall, a framed photo. Reeves stepped closer, his pulse still racing. The photo was old, the edges yellowed with time. It showed a family, a mother, a father, and their daughter, the little girl, the one he had just seen. At the bottom of the frame, written in elegant cursive, Emily Holloway. 1952 to 1960. Reeves's stomach dropped. Emily Holloway. She had been dead for over 60 years, and yet he had just seen her. A sudden chill prickled his skin. He turned back toward the hallway, gripping the key he had found. Somehow, he knew. This wasn't over. This house still had secrets, and he wasn't alone. The cold metal key in Reeves's palm felt heavier than it should have. His pulse pounded in his ears as he stared at the framed photo of Emily Holloway, the girl he had seen, spoken to, and chased through this rotting house. But Emily had been dead for over 60 years. His fingers curled around the key as a gnawing unease settled deep in his chest. He needed to get out of this house. But the house had other plans. A low creaking sound echoed from somewhere downstairs. Reeves stiffened, instinctively reaching for his gun again. He turned toward the hallway, his breath shallow. The once pristine walls of the house were peeling again, the decay returning as if the momentary illusion of normalcy had been nothing more than a cruel trick. He moved cautiously down the stairs, each step groaning under his weight. The house felt alive, watching him, breathing around him. As he reached the bottom, a faint glow flickered from the far end of the hallway. The kitchen. Reeves's grip tightened on his weapon as he stepped forward. The dim light pulsed as if beckoning him. The air thickened with the sickly scent of something rotting. And then he heard it. A slow, rhythmic tapping. He turned the corner and froze. The kitchen was in ruins. The ceiling sagged, the floorboards warped with moisture. The cabinets hung open, their contents long turned to dust. But in the center of the room, an old wooden dining table stood untouched by time, and seated at the table, Emily. Her small fingers tapped absently against the wood as she stared down at something in front of her. She didn't acknowledge Reeves, didn't even look up. Cautiously, he stepped closer. Emily? The girl remained silent. Reeves followed her gaze. On the table in front of her sat a rusted metal lockbox. It was old, decades old, its surface covered in deep scratches, as if someone had tried desperately to pry it open. Reeves's pulse quickened. The key. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. As he pulled it out, Emily finally spoke. He doesn't want you to open it. A shiver ran through Reeves. Who? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily's eyes slowly lifted to meet his, and when they did, he saw it. Terror. The man in the dark. The words sent an unnatural chill through him. A sudden, deafening bang erupted from upstairs. Reeves spun toward the sound, his heart hammering. The entire house seemed to groan, the walls quivering as if something massive was shifting within them. When he turned back, Emily was gone. The chair sat empty, gently rocking back and forth. The lockbox remained. Reeves didn't hesitate. Whatever secrets this house held, whatever it was hiding, he was done playing by its rules. He slid the key into the lock, a perfect fit. With a deep breath, he twisted. Click. The lock snapped open. Slowly, he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in brittle, yellowed cloth, was a journal. He picked it up carefully, dust drifting into the air. The name scrawled across the cover sent a fresh wave of unease through him. James Holloway. Emily's father. Reeves flipped it open. The pages were filled with jagged handwriting, the ink smudged and hurried. He skimmed through until a single passage caught his eye. His stomach turned. I hear him at night. The man in the dark. He whispers through the walls, through the floors. He watches Emily when she sleeps. He wants her. He told me I have to give her to him, or he'll take her anyway. Reeves swallowed hard. This wasn't just a haunted house. This was something worse. A story of sacrifice. Of something ancient. A force that had claimed Emily and possibly others before her. And it was still here. The shadows in the corners of the room shifted. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from the darkness. Reeves barely had time to react before the lights went out. Darkness. Complete. Unrelenting. And then, that voice again. You shouldn't have opened it. A whisper. So close. Right behind him. Reeves turned, raising his flashlight, and saw it. A figure loomed in the pitch black, taller than the doorway itself, its limbs impossibly long. Its face, or the absence of a face, was a void of shifting shadows. It stood motionless, watching, waiting. Reeves's breath came fast and shallow. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get out. But his feet wouldn't move. The thing reached out, its fingers stretching toward him, and suddenly, a hand grabbed his wrist. Small, cold, Emily. She was beside him now, her grip tighter than it should have been. "Come with me." Reeves didn't question it. The instant she pulled, the darkness around them collapsed. The shadows screamed. The furniture was broken, scattered across the ruined floor. The journal still lay at his feet, untouched by the chaos. For a moment, he just breathed. Then, a voice. Software familiar. "Officer?" Reeves turned. Emily stood in the doorway. Her small frame was trembling, her eyes wide with fear. "He's still here." A slow, rhythmic creaking filled the room. The rocking chair, moving on its own, back and forth, back and forth. A whisper crawled through the walls. "One must stay, one must go." Reeves's blood ran cold. Emily stared at him, and for the first time, she wasn't looking at him for help. She was pleading. She knew. One of them wouldn't leave this house alive, and the man in the dark was waiting for his choice. The house held its breath. Reeves stood frozen, Emily's wide, pleading eyes locked onto his. The whisper slithered through the rotting walls, curling around them like unseen fingers. "One must stay. One must go." The words were a decree, a rule as old as the house itself. Reeves's pulse hammered in his ears. He clenched his fists, trying to push back the suffocating dread pressing in on him. Emily knew. She had always known. This wasn't just about saving her, it had never been. This was about balance. Someone had to take her place. The house, the thing inside it, wouldn't let both of them go. Emily's lips trembled. Her small hands clutched at the hem of her tattered dress. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. A deep, guttural creak echoed through the house. The shadows stretched, pulsing with life, shifting at the edges of the room. The man in the dark was waiting. Reeves inhaled shakily. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to get out of this place, to leave Emily behind and save himself. But he couldn't. He was a cop, a protector. And this girl, whether she was a ghost, a trapped soul, or something else entirely, was still a child. He had sworn to protect the innocent. He wouldn't fail her. Reeves' jaw tightened. "No," he said. Emily's breath hitched. "No?" His heart pounded. "I'm not letting it take you." The house shuddered violently. The shadows roared in protest. The rocking chair toppled over, slamming into the floor with a deafening bang. And then the whisper laughed. Low, amused, as if entertained by his defiance. "You think you have a choice?" The voice was closer now. Right behind him, Reeves spun, and the big man in the dark loomed over him. Its featureless void of a face stretched, the swirling shadows twisting, shifting, forming something almost like a smile. "You are already mine." Reeves felt it then, a metra-cold hand, closing around his throat. It wasn't flesh, it wasn't human. It was something ancient, something that had been waiting for decades, watching from the dark, starving for its next sacrifice. Reeves gasped, his body locking up, the cold spreading through his veins like poison. His vision blurred. The room dimmed. Somewhere in the haze, Emily screamed. "Let him go." The darkness buckled. Reeves hit the floor, gasping for air. His vision swam, his limbs weak and shaking. Emily stood in front of him now, her small figure defiant. She turned to the shadow, her tiny fists clenched. "Take me back instead." Reeves' blood froze. "No," he rasped. Emily didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on the swirling abyss before her. "You said one must stay. I'll stay." The shadows hissed. They twisted violently, writhing like a living thing. Then, the whisper sighed, content, satisfied. The darkness rushed forward. Emily didn't move. She didn't fight. She simply smiled. A single tear slipped down her pale cheek, and then she was gone. The house screamed. The walls trembled, the ceiling cracked, and then the darkness collapsed in on itself. The air snapped, like a rubber band pulled too tight and finally released. And then, silence. The house was empty. Reeves staggered to his feet, his breath ragged. The room around him was nothing more than a ruined shell. Emily was gone, and so was Ako. The man in the dark, the curse, everything, the house, whatever it had been, was finally just a house. Reeves swallowed hard, his legs unsteady as he moved toward the front door. The moment he crossed the threshold, the weight that had pressed against him since he stepped foot inside lifted. The air was clean, fresh. The nightmare was over. But as he turned back for one last look, he saw it. A single rocking chair. Still. Silent. And for the briefest moment, he swore he saw Emily sitting there, smiling. Then, she was gone, and the house finally slept.